don't have a huge number of slides, but just a few, because I'd rather show you than talk to you about what it is I'm showing you. We're going to record this session, so if you wouldn't mind being off camera and on mute, that would be fantastic. If you do have questions, we do have the chat facility running, so you'll be able to pop a question in there. And my intention is to see the chat and go through it as we are doing the session. We have a fair bit to get through in the next hour. So obviously it is, there's a fairly packed agenda, but we'll get through that. And hopefully we'll get through as many of your questions as possible. So let's make a start. Prompts to productivity is what we're going to be talking about. So we're going to explore Copilot Chat, but also explore prompting in particular. And we'll look at a few other things as well. So we'll talk about security, because using AI, of course, is a massively important thing to be aware of. Security around using AI and using it well and using it carefully is absolutely crucial. So obviously different places to find Copilot. We've got Copilot in different sort of apps, etc. We'll explore Copilot. We'll have a look through the interface. We'll talk about prompting. I'll show you some examples of best practice. Also sharing prompts and saving them, because that's one of the crucial things to be able to do, is to help the organization benefit from prompts that work. If somebody finds a prompt and an approach to a particular solution that they find works really well, it's fantastic if they can share that. So basically, we'll show you some of the different ways that is possible to do. And then we'll also talk about agents. Agents in Copilot Chat are the starting point, if you like, for agents. They're the starting point of agentic AI. So we're talking here about essentially creating something which has a set of skills that you've built in, so that you can simply go to it and ask it some questions within that skill set. And I'll show you what that means as we go through the session. Quick thing about me. So I've been a certified trainer now for Microsoft for a long time, as you can see on, did I put it on that slide? No, I think I didn't embarrass myself by putting the actual number of years. So I've been doing this for a while. I've been working with Microsoft and for Microsoft for a number of years on and off. And my approach has always been that I'm a lifelong learner, and if I don't know the answer to something, I will go away and look it up. So please, if you put a question in the chat and it's something that makes me scratch my head a little bit, I will dig in and find the answer, hopefully before we finish this session. So please do ask anything you like if it's relevant within the Copilot space. So let's get started with Copilot. Secure by design. What does that mean? Why do we think of security when we think of AI? Why is it so crucial? And why are things like governance becoming increasingly common topics of conversation? Because essentially, well, let's go back to 2022, and I think it was a pivotal moment for a couple of reasons. Firstly, ChatGPT was released. And people suddenly had access to an AI tool. They could go into what many people treated at the time like a glorified chatbot, but they can go in and have conversations and do stuff. And you had DALL-E for creating images and all this sort of stuff. Copilot came out after that, but ChatGPT, obviously, the same framework, the same LLM, if you like, the same language model that everything is built upon. So ChatGPT came out first, and it took, well, if you think of Facebook, how long it took to get to 1 million users, it was something like just over 2 years, if I remember rightly. Twitter took a little bit less, but still over 18 months. Things like TikTok have taken, several months or a year to get to 1 million users. ChatGPT took a week. So just let that sink in. ChatGPT took 1 week to go from 0 to 1 million users, which is suggests two things. One is people want this kind of interaction. They want a tool that they can simply sit down and talk to. They want to be able to do it in the same way. I think of it as the same way people wanted Wi-Fi. I don't want to have to plug a cable in and walk around with a cable hanging out of my laptop. I just want to be able to get network wherever I am. And there we are. So that's what people wanted. The second thing that this highlights is the concern from a governance perspective. There's a report produced recently by Microsoft that says 60% of organizations are basically have users in the organization who are using AI for work purposes, and it's not sanctioned by by the business, which means that there are security concerns. If you're using the public version of ChatGPT, for instance, it's basically internet based. There are no safeguards around it like there are with Copilot in a business environment. As you can see on that slide, we're going to talk about enterprise data protection in a moment. So security a really important consideration. Could we pop that on mute? Thank you. Not sure what that was, but somebody's obviously traveling somewhere. So basically, we've got a lot of different things to think about from a security perspective. So Copilot Chat is grounded in Microsoft security protocols and tools. So all the things that exist in an environment which has Microsoft security around it, which could be at the very least Active Directory or Entra in the cloud, or it could be more than that. So, data classification and labeling and all the governance tools which are available. Copilot works within that context. And on this slide, you can see that there's the piece on the right there, which is secure by design, authentication. The very first thing you do in the morning when you sign into your computer is you authenticate. You authenticate to the environment. You prove who you are. Multi-factor authentication, anti-phishing multi-factor as well. All of those things, you do that before you do anything. And then once you've authenticated, you are then authorized. In other words, you proved who you are. Now, what can you do? So Copilot works within the same context as that. There is one Copilot per user. It's a one-to-one relationship. You don't share somebody else's Copilot, they don't share yours. And if you can't see some data, Copilot can't see it either. So it's really important to remember that it all works within the security context of your authentication and your authorization. And of course, then you have other things that complement the way that it works in terms of enterprise data and so on. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a brief moment. There are other sort of capabilities that we'll talk about today. Some of them mentioned on that slide, GPT-5 something. So there's a new version just come out. GPT is available within Copilot agents, which we'll talk about towards the end of the session, and things like Copilot pages. And I'll explain what pages are as we go through. So just to really summarize the sort of enterprise data protection piece, encryption is a crucial part of data management, data protection, data encrypted at rest, data encrypted in transit. Copilot works within that context. Also, your data, your organization's data within Copilot is your data. Your data is never used to train foundational models. This is part of enterprise data protection, and I'll show you the page to go to verify that. The access controls as well. Now, not just access controls in terms of authentication, so proving who you are and being authorized, but also any additional controls. So, for instance, if an organization has data loss prevention, or if they have something like Purview, and they've started to put conditions and they've started to put labels on their data, those two work with Copilot. In other words, if I do a search for something, or if I create a prompt and I use a confidential document, and I say to Copilot, please create me a new report based on this style, but a new subject, Copilot will respond by creating a confidential document for me. In other words, the confidentiality, the level of protection, the level of classification of the data is preserved. And so this comes back to that point where I cannot see something I'm not allowed to see, and I cannot declassify something I'm not allowed to declassify. So I can't bypass security. And I've just seen a note there with, if a SharePoint file is shared with anyone with the link, can my Copilot find and index the file? So this is a good question, and it comes down to something called explicit versus implicit sharing. So if you share something explicitly with another person or another group, then they can see it, and potentially nobody else can. If something is shared with maybe like anyone with this link or everyone, then there's implicit sharing. And the only way to stop that happening would be to put explicit denial in place. So this comes down to how important it is for an organization to consider how its data is managed before they start moving into a Copilot era. Because obviously you can put lots of things in place afterwards. And it's, you can design your environment and then start to put blockers in and denies and this, that, and the other. But it gets very messy very quickly and it becomes less predictable. So it's really important to consider how you share, what you share. And with SharePoint, which is a good example, SharePoint, obviously, there is a lot of potential data in there. And there is a lot of data that maybe you don't necessarily want to be featured in prompts. You don't want it used by Copilot in terms of searching and result gathering, etc. And you can manage that. So it's all about really thinking about the organization and understanding what it is you want Copilot to have access to, along the lines of what you want the users to have access to. Microsoft had this idea of something called zero trust, which essentially is zero trust means verify explicitly, so always make people authenticate. Least privilege, in other words, only give people the rights they need for a particular thing and limit that time. And secondly, or lastly, should I say, assume breach. Assume that somebody is trying to get in. Assume that somebody already has. So using those sort of approaches, it's a philosophy because the tools around the Microsoft space will let you do all of those things. But it's a philosophy around making sure that everything is tightened up as much as possible. We have to be proactive in our security. Anyway, the last thing on this slide, by the way, regional compliance. Obviously, Microsoft is broken down into regions, global regions for data centers, and customers use those regions based on their location. Now, some organizations have a global footprint, and so they can then therefore use regions wherever their offices happen to be. If they're in the Asian region, if they're in EMEA, if they're in the US or Americas, they can use whatever. But some organizations may not have that. Some organizations may be based, say, in the UK, which is where I am. So it's important for the compliance requirements to be recognized as to be specific to the regional compliance needs for that particular organization. So regional specifics posing limitations of Copilot to EMEA. Well, what this means is potentially that if you were using Copilot, say, as a web-based tool, it may go and use Bing in another region to satisfy requirements for your browsing. Now, it's not going to use your data because your data won't live in another region, but it might use Bing globally to satisfy, say, a web-based question, which wouldn't be so much a concern with Copilot Chat here because this is the free version. With the pro version, you do have the option to look at web or work. But it's really, again, about the organization having those conversations with Microsoft or with the provider and just saying, look, this is what we need, this is what we can do, this is what we can't do, and let's make sure that we're browsing and using data according to our compliance requirements. It's absolutely critical that we get this right because organizations are very much at risk of, being in contravention of compliance requirements, things like GDPR in Europe and that kind of thing. It's really, really important that we think of governance when we think of how we use AI. And this includes how we're using people outside the organization use AI as well. So there are a couple of ways to get to Copilot Chat. You can go through a private browsing session. I'll just show you what that would look like. I'm running a Mac here, so it doesn't really matter what. Let's just do a new private window here. So if I go to Copilot, .microsoft. In fact, let me just put Copilot in the chat. If I just put Copilot in the browser there, then basically it's not going to come up with what it came up with before. So that's typical. So let's do this. So if I just do a search for Copilot, you'll notice that the very first URL that comes up is copilot.microsoft.com. And if I click on that, this is Copilot. So I accept the cookies and then I can go in and start using AI. This is the free version, totally unconnected to an organization version of Copilot. This is akin to using something like the free version of another AI tool. So you're basically in here, you're browsing the internet, you're looking at personal data, if you don't sign in, by the way, you can still use it, but obviously the conversations aren't saved in the way they would be normally. But you have access to lots of other things down here. So you've got things like the library, which we'll see in a moment. You've got tasks, which is in beta here, which actually doesn't feature in the version I've got at the moment of Copilot Chat. And then there's other things like Labs, Imagine, and Discover, where you can start to create images and do all sorts of things. So this is basically the free, completely unorganizational Copilot environment. If I decide to sign in down here, then this is basically where I decide to sign in with a company account or my personal account. Now, I've already signed in with a company account because I have a 365 subscription and I have Copilot Chat free in it. So this is basically my 365 environment. I've got Copilot Chat, and to get to it, all I do is I go to m365.cloud.microsoft. So basically very similar to this. The interface changes a lot, by the way. Do bear that in mind. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the fact that Microsoft changed things quite quickly and quite regularly. This is very true now for Copilot. There are updates constantly to its capability, to what it can do, to what it can do better. And the interface does change as well. So just bear that in mind. It's the nature of cloud. It's just unfortunately something that we have to put up with. But you will find that things will change. So this makes it difficult for us to produce material regularly, which sort of has screenshots and things like this, because things move around. So, but to get to the browser, to get to the Copilot chat, you can either go into 365copilot.com, or if you want the free version with no connection to the organization, then you would do it that way. So let's explore the interface before we go into prompting, just to give you a quick tour of it. There's a few things to be aware of, and they're mostly up here in the top right corner, to be fair. So if we look at the green shield here, if I just move my mouse over the green shield, if it's going to behave, let's just see if I can get that. And we've got something called Enterprise Data Protection. Enterprise Data Protection will take us to this page. So this is Microsoft explaining how data is used and, more to the point, not used for Copilot. So the important thing here is your data is not used to train foundational models. So basically what this means is that your Copilot for your organization is not going to help some other organization's Copilot get better or learn or get new skills. So essentially, it's really important to remember that. And if you're using Copilot, you'll notice when we look in a moment that we've got ChatGPT in Copilot. What that basically means is we have an enterprise grade version of ChatGPT protected by the same coverage as Copilot within the organization. In other words, we're not opening a door to anything. We're simply saying, okay, we want to use another tool which has been sanctioned for use as a business tool versus the free one that anybody can sign up with their Outlook or Hotmail or Gmail account, whatever they want to use. So that's an important thing to remember. So enterprise data protection is that little green shield in the top right corner. Next to that, the blue button allows us to start a new chat. And we can also have a temporary chat. If there was something you wanted to talk about where you didn't necessarily need to keep it, you could do so. I don't use that very often. I can't think of when I last did use it, to be honest, but some people think, yes, I'd like to use that. But the other one is the new chat button. When you're going to have a new conversation about a topic, start a new chat. If you talk to a friend and you start going off at tangents about different subjects, they'll get confused. And if you're using Copilot, the same is true. It will get confused. And what it does is it ruins the possibility of Copilot giving you good answers. And I'll explain more about that when we talk about prompting. But if you want to start a new topic, start a new chat. If you look over here on the left-hand side, these are the chats that I've been having for the last, 18 months plus. So you can see that I've got something in the last 7 days, previous 30 days, and then I can simply go see more, and I can just keep going down that list. So if you wanted to find something like I'm looking for a prompt that includes the words insights. There we go, convert the insights into a visual dashboard. I'll show you what I use this for in a moment. But basically, this is I'm able to search chats I've had in the past. So you never lose it. Unless your organization has decided that they're going to cut down the chats or remove them or whatever, you never lose it. So you can always go back and continue a conversation, and you don't need to remind Copilot where you were because it knows. So it understands because it's all structured in that memory space. So start a new chat for something that you want to start talking about, a new thing. but revisit older conversations if you need to, and you can simply do that by going to the chat list down here on the left-hand side. Now, the other option here, well, there's actually two. The ellipsis up here in the top right corner, if I go to settings, this will let me go to personalization, and I can tell Copilot how I want it to behave with me. Because one of the questions we quite often get is, how do I stop Copilot being biased? Or how do I stop Copilot being rude? Or any of those things? And the default is it shouldn't be like that. That's not a behavior that we would expect. If there's something happening where Copilot is behaving strangely, then we need to report it because it's potentially a possibility that it's been hacked. We need to make sure that we're protecting ourselves and our data. But the short answer is, how do I stop bias, or how do I have a good interaction with an AI, is how we interact with the AI. They learn, basically, from how we interact, what we expect. They learn what we agree to, what we like, and what we don't accept. So all of that is the learning. It's not just about learning with data, it's also about learning with what I call attitude. So it's how they interact. So you can basically say custom instructions, and you can edit the custom instructions to say, these are things that you'd like to add about you, so that will inform how Copilot responds to prompts you put in, particularly from a personal perspective. You know, I mean, simple thing. If you're somebody who's, maybe you broke your leg on holiday and you want to go somewhere for the weekend, but you don't want to have to climb loads of stairs, then you could put something in here and say, this is my limitation at the moment. Go find me a holiday for a weekend. And then Copilot will do that. What it won't do is it won't specify something that involves hours of walking. So it's just things like that, giving it facts about you, information about you. It doesn't have to be too personal, just how you want Copilot to interact. If we go to the work profile piece, we can basically specify our location and things like that. And also then saved memories, because we can go back to all memories and we can delete memories that Copilot has about us. Now, you can do this, but basically it is, I find it doesn't hurt to keep this, because it means that it can go back and it'll start responding in the same way that it did before. And you can also then, of course, improve it by prompting differently and then accepting the responses that Copilot gives you back. Just see the note in there. Can you edit the custom instructions for different apps, like one personalization for Outlook and another for Word? Short answer is I don't know. My gut feeling is no, because it's Copilot. It's that one-to-one relationship. So what you can do is you can interact with those apps in a slightly different way, potentially by using agents. And then you can clarify through the agent how you want it to behave with those apps. So I don't believe you can specify a different personalization, because it is a one-to-one relationship. But thanks for the question. So that's the little ellipsis up there. And then the last of these little clusters here is this one, auto. So at the moment it says auto, but actually I can change that to quick response or think deeper, because Copilot now has the ability to do deeper research in the same way that ChatGPT can. And in fact, if we go to the bottom drop down, we've got the option to use ChatGPT 5.3 or 5.2, and I'm sure 5.4 will appear at some point, to augment how Copilot responds to things we put in. Now, you might think, okay, well, I understand quick response, and I understand think deeper. Well, why auto? Well, auto is there because Copilot will, based upon the type of question you're asking, the amount of work that it needs to do to satisfy your request, and potentially anything you've attached to your request. So you might have said, okay, here's a document I want to use, go away and do something else. Based upon that, Copilot will use an algorithm to decide whether it's auto or not. So it might be that you said quick response, and then you put in this long involved prompt requiring quite a lot of work from Copilot. Copilot might then default over to auto. So it's really about allowing, because sometimes people say, well, it takes several minutes for Copilot to respond with a think deeper, which is true. It does take longer. And that may not be necessary or appropriate for many of the things you're putting in. I mean, if you're just taking a document and comparing it to another one, think deeper, you can argue you don't really need it. But for some things, if you're doing research, if you're going in and trying to do some sort of chain of thought or brainstorming with Copilot, because it can be very powerful for that, then you might want it to go away and think deeper. You might want it to go more deeply into the subjects that you're looking at. So the chat window is here. And obviously you've got the microphone, so you could use dictation. You've got the option to add. Now, if I add content, let's say if I upload a file from my local machine, then basically that's going to then put that file into my OneDrive. I could also go to my OneDrive and I could upload a file from there. So I can upload this file and say select. Now this is an AI document about PDF, start again. This is a Microsoft document, a PDF about the use of AI in the workplace. So it's quite a long, involved report. And it's, something which I might want Copilot to do a summary of, and I can do that, and I'll show you what that would look like in a moment. But basically, I can add something in here. I can add up to 20 files in here. So I could do comparisons of things. I could compare, say, two spreadsheets, and then even have Copilot create a third spreadsheet based on the differences between the two. That's quite a useful thing to be able to do. So you've got the option to add files to enable Copilot to give you a better view, whatever it is you're working on. Other options, by the way, these pre-prompts, if you like, so things that you might find useful. This is based on interactions I've had with Copilot in the past. And then over here on the left-hand side, I've got new chat, I've got search, I've got library, which I'll come to in a moment. And then this is the agents section here, which we'll talk about towards the end of the session. Okay. So we've had a few questions come through so far. I'm going to carry on and talk about prompting. So a prompt, what is a prompt? Well, obviously we have to interact with an AI in some way. And we have something called natural language. And natural language allows us to interact with Copilot, ChatGPT, and the rest of them in a way that works for humans. And it does that because the data that's stored in Copilot, the information that's been ingested by Copilot and the rest of them, is done through what they call a large language model. So there are two things to think about. One is Copilot is not a coding tool, but it can use coding tools. So it uses Python, it uses Ruby, it can use whatever you need to. It's very good at looking at code and finding the missing mistake or whatever it might be. But it is also a language model. So what does that mean? If I interact with Copilot, it's using the words I use to understand what it is I want. So think about that. The words I use, the order in which I use them, the phrases I use, the sentences I use, the structure, all of the sort of buzzwords like doing words like get, research, build, create, all of that sort of thing. It's using those words to respond to me. So it's really critical that I use the right words to describe what I want, because if I don't do that, Copilot won't know what I want. You'll hear expressions where people say, let the AI think. At the level we're working with AI today, AI is not thinking. What AI is doing is it's looking at the probability of the word that you put in being associated with the words that it has in its large language model. Let me show you an example. So I'm just going to get rid of this document. I don't need that for this example, but I'm going to ask Copilot, complete this sentence. So this is a very simple prompt. It's just asking Copilot to finish a sentence. It's basically just asking it to be a bit creative. And I've said, I am going to walk, and I want to see what Copilot will come up with. Because certainly in the UK, there's a particular pastime which is very popular, and it's walking the dog. So what I'm expecting is for Copilot to look at the collection of words in its language model and build a relationship between the words that I put in my prompt and the words that make sense in terms of probability. Remember, it's not thinking, it's not joining the dots, it's not intuitive, it's none of those things. It's really about what makes sense. So if I hit go, Copilot should come back with, I'm going to walk to the store down the road, etc. Okay. So what I now want to do is change this prompt ever so slightly. And I've now just put in, it's exactly the same prompt apart from one additional word. And the very first option that comes up is the one I expected. The most common word that finishes a sentence, I'm going to walk the, is dog. It's not skateboard, it's not tree, it's dog. And this is a probabilistic decision made by Copilot. So it's given me back dog because it's also given me other options because Copilot is super helpful, and it's trying to satisfy other options. You can also turn that off, by the way. You can have Copilot be much briefer and just give you what you asked for and not give you a load of other options. But, it doesn't hurt sometimes because it can quite often help you to think about other things that you might want. So that's fine. What I'm going to do now, though, is I'm going to start a new chat. I don't have to, but I'm going to for this example. And I'm going to choose this one. So again, similar prompt. I'm going to walk there, but what I've done this time is I've given Copilot some context. In other words, I haven't just simply said, I'm going to walk there, because what it will do then is it'll go, oh, walk there, walk there. The most common word that goes at the end of that sentence is dog. Now I've given it some context. I am on a pirate ship. And so Copilot is now looking at things that connote pirates, related subjects, related words. Again, not thinking, just simply doing a probabilistic check. And so what it should come up with a bit of luck, is plank. And there we go. So essentially it's worked out that the probability, I'm not going to walk a dog on a pirate ship, right? But I am going to walk the plank because that's what goes on pirate ships. And that's purely because of all the information that Copilot has been given. But notice that the difference in the prompting, a simple word, a simple change of sentence, adding a bit of context. And this is not a difficult prompt. This is just a very simple prompt to get back a quick result. So essentially, remember that you've got this idea of how you ask a question and the context you give Copilot to help it understand what it is you're after. We'll come back to prompting in a moment, but I just want to take you through a few examples here in the Microsoft content. Microsoft have come up with this idea of a CGSE, so context, goals, source, expectations. And essentially, it's about thinking about structuring your prompt. If there's an expression going back a number of years, which is garbage in, garbage out. There's somebody off the mic. Was that a question coming in? Or I noticed just, by the way, somebody's got their hand up far away. No, Caden? Not there? All right. If you have a question, please ask. If you don't have a question, can I ask you to go on mute? Yeah, if I can ask you to go on mute, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay. So the idea is when you're prompting, you have to know what you want. You have to understand what do I need? Sorry, can we go on mute, please? Thank you. Yeah, if it's very tricky, unfortunately, because there's so many of us, and if we all have the mics off, it might be a little bit chaotic. Okay. Bear with me a second. Right. So the first thing you need to think about when you're prompting is what is it I want to get? What do I want Copilot to do? And this sounds like a really simplistic thing. It's like, well, yeah, of course, that's what you do. But you have to think in a structured way. You have to think about, okay, what is the context of what I'm after? What would I like it to do? What is the audience I want this for? How do I want to describe the tone of something? How would I describe how much of something I want? Do I want, 50 pages? Do I want 10 slides? Do I want 6 bullet points? Think about what you want. Think about the format that you want it. And also, as it says on this slide here, why do you need it and who is involved? In other words, who is involved is your audience. If you're creating, there's an example we sometimes run, which is you put a prompt in that says, explain quantum physics for suitable for 8-year-olds. And it comes up with a quantum physics description, which is perfectly workable for 8-year-olds. That same thing wouldn't work for a room full of technicians. So you have to think about your audience, the tone of what you're using. For instance, if you're creating something for social media, then it's likely the tone is going to be different than if you're creating it for a board meeting with the directors of the company. So think about the tone, think about the audience. Understanding that can be really, really beneficial. Then, of course, you've got the goal. Copilot's going to respond. It's very unusual to get things right first time. Very unusual. You might do, but you might not. So be prepared to iterate. In other words, you do a prompt, you get a response back. Maybe it's a 3 or 4 part prompt response, and you say, well, I like numbers 1 and 2, but I don't really like number 3. Can you try again? Or can you reword 4 so it sounds a bit more like the rest? Or can you redesign this response? And you just keep iterating. Copilot never gets tired, never gets bored, never needs coffee. We will just carry on as much as you want. You can reiterate, iterate, 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 and just get to what it is you need. This may be a slightly longer process, but if you're patient and if you really think about what it is you want to do, and also think about what Copilot is doing. Think about what it's doing. It's interacting with a large language model and using probability to give you a response. So if you think about that, that can really help you to try and dig in with the prompting to get the response that you want. The other thing, by the way, is sharding. So iteration is literally where you get a prompt response and then you just say, okay, can you do it again? Can you do it again? Can you do it again? Kind of thing. Sharding is slightly different. Sharding is where you have maybe a large task that you want Copilot to perform. Now, you could just create one massive prompt, and I will show you an example of a prompt like that. You can have one massive prompt and just say, go away and do this. But that wouldn't always be the most effective way to work. So maybe you could break things down into chunks and have Copilot do each chunk in turn and then assemble everything at the end. So you can really use Copilot very effectively to have it sort of help you with a large piece of data. And that's how you decide on the responses. Copilot also works very well if you give it something to work with. So if you say, this is information that I've already got, I'd like something more, can you do that? Expectations. Tell Copilot what it is you want. Let me give you an example of a very long prompt, because I'm going to show you something called pages or library. And I'm also going to show you how to save prompts for later. So if we go to the library, in the library, there is something called pages and images. Images are images that I've asked Copilot to create in the past. So I asked it to create some images that would help me explain large language models and how prompting works. And so it came up with these. So that was just a prompt I put in and it came back with the response. If I go to pages, a page in Copilot Chat is literally a collection of stuff. So, for instance, you could have useful info down here. I've renamed these so you can call them what you like. This one is called useful info, not prompts. So it's literally some useful URLs, which I've decided to keep because I can go back to them and revisit them. But the real use of pages is where you want to go in and save prompts. So if I go to this one here, for instance, I've got a link to the Copilot prompt gallery, and I'll show you the prompt gallery in a moment. But I've also got things like a prompt down here. So this is that large document I showed you earlier. This prompt would help me summarize that document. So it's doing it for a board meeting with senior management. I've given it the audience. I need a 10-bullet summary. So I've told it what I want. I told it why I want it, because I'm going to present it. I want a non-technical executive summary. And I've also put something which is crucial when you're prompting, which is this. Please ask for more information if it will help your response. In other words, I want Copilot to interact with me. I want Copilot to check that it's giving me what I want. When I put a prompt in, I'd like Copilot to come back and say, okay, before I go, let me check exactly what it is you're after. And maybe there's some additional information you can provide that would help. So that's why that sentence, please ask for more information if it will help your response, is really important. The last thing as well, I find quite useful because sometimes Copilot doesn't necessarily show you where it got the information from. And so it's important to let Copilot know that you want that. You want it to give you the information about where it got its data. You want to understand what's going on with it. So basically, remind Copilot to do that. And I mentioned earlier on a very long prompt. This is a prompt. So this is actually describing an agent and how the agent behaves. So it's a prompt because it's instructions. It just happens to be stored inside an agent. This is actually an agent in another subscription that I use. But what I've done is I've basically put in as much as I can think of to have the agent behave with me in a way that works. In other words, I want it to be as much like me as possible. I want it to be engaging. I want it to be understanding. I want it to be approachable. I want it to ask me for questions if it doesn't understand. I don't want it to lie to me. I don't want it to make things up. I want it to be factual. And so I basically put all of that in this. And so this is like I say, an example of a longer prompt that you might use. So when prompting, an effective prompt here, for instance, would be give me a concise summary about a particular thing. So you could do some research about a company online, focus on articles from the last 2 months, provide the answer in 2 or 3 paragraphs, and use a business tone. This is just a simple example of how to prompt and how to get a better information out. Some best practices. Be specific. Don't start things in the middle. Don't do that thing. I have friends, actually, there's one of them where they start a conversation in the middle, like you heard the first bit. So that was in their head and you didn't hear that. So then they start talking about something. You think, whoa, hang on a minute. I don't understand. So don't do that with Copilot because you won't get very good responses back. It will respond. It just won't be what you expect and it won't be as useful as it could be. So be clear, be specific, keep it conversational. We're trying to encourage people to have conversations with Copilot, just to have sort of back and forth. Not only will that help the attitude and train the behavior of Copilot, it will also encourage you to start interacting with Copilot in a more relaxed way. And also think about how to ask Copilot. Remember, it's a language model. It's not thinking. It's going away and using probability to work out whether what it gives you back is the most obvious thing. And if it isn't right, then iterate. Just go back. Give it examples. Have it say, okay, this is what I've got already. I'd like something like this. Also, ask for feedback. So please ask for more information if it will help. Make sure you're legible. Actually, spelling mistakes and a bit of illegibility doesn't really matter, but it's good practice to keep it legible. Apart from anything else, if you're sharing those prompts with other people, you want to have them make sense. Checking for accuracy. Now, this is absolutely and totally one of the most important things because AI does make mistakes. AI can be inaccurate. And it's literally because of the way we prompt and possibly the way that it's interacting with the data that it has at its disposal. All sorts of reasons can have it interact. You hear stories about hallucination where Copilot or AI makes things up. These things do happen occasionally, and we need to be very much aware that the people in charge of the data are us. The people in charge of the responses are us. It's up to us to verify. It's up to us to verify the information. The other thing is that when we're looking at the information, If we're not the subject matter expert, then we need to engage people who are. Because if I see I don't work with spreadsheets very much, and if I see a spreadsheet and I've asked Copilot to go away and do something and analyze it, and it comes back with something, and I think, oh, that's clever, but I don't know. I don't know that that's right. I don't know that that's accurate data. I need to make sure that I know that's accurate data, and I can only do that if I have somebody with me or part of the organization who can basically help me to verify it. Just see the question there, by the way. I won't forget. I won't leave you out. Uh, Provide details. Be polite. Like I said, we're training Copilot to interact with us. I want a polite colleague, a polite assistant. So that's how I interact with Copilot. And iterate and refine. And of course, things to avoid: don't be vague, don't request anything unethical, don't use slang. Obviously, jargon and so on might be part of a business taxonomy. If you're in a research establishment, for instance, you'll have a different taxonomy than if you're in a school. But and avoid conflicting instructions as well. Now, I mentioned before about accuracy. Copilot is incredibly knowledgeable. This applies equally well to other AIs. They are absolutely so knowledgeable. There's huge amounts of data, trillions of bits of data being ingested into these things to allow us to interact with them on a variety of subjects. However, what they don't necessarily have is experience, because that's a human thing. And experience is also not just about learning something, it's about learning beyond it. And I've used this as an example because in the UK, we have a national speed limit, which is 60 miles an hour, which is something like 90 kilometers, 90 or 100 kilometers an hour. So it's quite fast, right? And this is a genuine sign or a genuine road with genuine signs in the south of England where it's saying the limit here is 60 miles an hour. So knowledge tells you it's 60. So accelerate and away you go. Experience says, no, don't do that because it's very windy. It's got lots of sharp bends. It's very narrow. And there could be something coming the other way and lots of other reasons. So my point is this. AI gives you information back based upon its knowledge. It's up to us as the humans in the loop to look at the experience of it and understand whether or not Copilot is giving us something fit for purpose. It's up to us to check. I've just seen your question. In the case of long prompts, when someone's logic does not flow as smoothly, will Copilot reason and rework the prompt to follow the proper thought and action process? And the answer is no, because it's only able to deal with the information you put in the prompt. Remember, it's not thinking. It's not going to extrapolate. It's not going to reassess. It's not considering anything. The only way Copilot will help you to do something like that, and it isn't perfect and it doesn't really work very well, is if you've started prompting on a similar subject to the one you had previously in the same conversation, then Copilot can potentially look at information or maybe look at questions you asked before or maybe facts you gave Copilot about yourself and then help you. But there's no consideration, there's no thinking, there's no sort of planning, there's no intuition, nothing like that. So unfortunately not. Okay. I notice the time, we've got about 10 minutes left or 12 minutes. So I'm going to talk about Copilot Gallery very quickly, because what I want to show you in here is the opportunity to save a prompt to the Copilot Gallery. So I've got a prompt here, very simple one. I wouldn't normally save this, but I just want to show you how it works. If you move your mouse over the prompt, you'll notice you've got the option to edit and copy. But there's also this one, save prompt. And here I can give a title to the prompt, and I can have the prompt down here, and I can choose save, and then it comes up with this link here, view in Copilot Gallery. The Copilot prompt gallery is available through Copilot, and it's a combination of Microsoft prompts on different tasks or potentially different job types, and also including agents. So these are all the Microsoft prompts potentially, and as you can see the size of that scroll bar, there are a lot of these. So this is basically Microsoft giving you some prompts to get you started, but also your prompts. So that's the prompt I just saved. Now, there's a couple of ways to save this. I can share this prompt. This is one way, because notice there's a sharing option down the bottom there to share either by copying the link or share to a team in SharePoint, which obviously will then feature in Teams itself. So I've got the option to do that, but I also have the option if I go to library. So if I copy this prompt this time, and I go to the library, and I go to here, and I paste the prompt there, and let's say this page is ready to go, and I think, well, actually, what would be really good is to actually save this page and let somebody else use it. Well, then you can go to here, and you can choose to share the link or copy the component in the same way that you would share a document in SharePoint or OneDrive. So you have the option to make prompts available to other people in the team. So I can't share this link, by the way, with anybody outside of my organization. So you would have to do this in your organization and then be able to share that page. So you can share prompts through pages like this, or you can share it through the Copilot prompt gallery. And this, I think, is a link to the Copilot prompt gallery. I'm going to, actually, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll put a link to this. Just get rid of that sharing bar. I'm going to put a link to this page here. So this is actually the Copilot prompt gallery, because it can be a bit tricky to find it, but it is there if you just do a search online and click on that link, and then it will open up the prompt gallery. Like I say, you can open up the prompt gallery as well when you save something to it. Okay. I don't think there's anything else I want to say necessarily about any of that. There are a few things to try with prompts. We can share these with you after the event. You'll have access to the recording as well, so you'll be able to see those. What I'd like to finish off with very quickly is to have a look at agents, because obviously agents is a critical part of using AI. Agents in Copilot Chat are a way to create tools which have everything you need built in. And I'll show you an example of an agent that I've built already, which is this one here. This material, the training material, is taken from Microsoft's MS 4023, which is an online course. We can go to Microsoft Learn and basically work through the course in your own time and see all the things that we've done here today and more. So if I open up the agent, you notice it opens up in a chat window. I can then say, tell me about prompting. Let's put in the right letters, shall we? So I did say it does deal with spelling mistakes, but let's just not make it too hard for it. So tell me about prompting. So what it's going to do is it's going to look at the 4023 training course, and it's going to pull out information about prompting. So what this means is I don't have to do that. I don't have to go to the 4023 training course and then go through all the pages of information about it until I find what it is I'm after. It's also a much more effective way of doing it than simply searching. So basically I've got all of the different things I want to do, 4 ingredients, tasks. Now, this is an agent that I created, and if I go to the ellipsis here, I can choose to edit the agent, and I can show you what goes on when you create one. Because when you create an agent, you've got the option to simply describe it. Microsoft call this describe to design. So you can do it with a lot of tools now where you can just tell Copilot what it is you want, and it will go away and build something, or at least help you iterate towards a build of something. Under configure, I've got the name, make it meaningful so other people know what it's for. Description, same thing, make sure it's meaningful. And some instructions. So I've given it a skill. This is, by the way, giving AI a persona. So I've said it's an expert in technology solutions and Microsoft training. Giving AI a persona helps it to focus very much on what it is you want, because it's a bit like narrowing the field of view. So making it an expert in a given subject, and you can be as rich as that as you want. So you can give it skills, and then it will focus its attention on that information only, rather than simply looking wherever it can. So using persona or giving AI a skill set is a very important thing. What I've also done is I've told it to be friendly and approachable and willing. I've also said, please ask for more information when you need it. Please verify where you find the information you give out. Please ask for more information if it will help your response. So I've basically tried to make it as helpful as possible and as factual as possible. Down here, I've given it the URL. So that's the URL for the 4023 training. I could also potentially add SharePoint information or other web addresses, but that's not standard part of the Copilot chat agents. I can also have it create documentation, so I can have it create Word documents, spreadsheets, or whatever I need, and even images, if that's something that I want the agent to be able to do. So this is a simple agent that I created myself, and if I choose to update it, not sure why it needs an update because I didn't do anything. What I can also do, we talked about sharing earlier on, is if I go back to the ellipsis, there's my edit option, which I was just in, share. So I can share this agent with other people in the organization. Now, you'll hear lots of talk about autonomous agents. This is not that. This is not autonomous. This is low or no code agent building. If you want to build autonomous agents, in other words, agents that will go away and react with data and talk to other agents and also go outside the organization, then you need to be looking at Copilot Studio. And Copilot Studio is a subscription-based tool, certainly if you want to talk outside the business, which allows you to go into more depth with agents and also use code. So if you're a developer and you have that skill set, you'll be able to go away and build agents with those capabilities. If you go to all agents, this is the page that I see. It may be slightly different for you, but I see the agent I created. There's also some of the agents that Microsoft created, so the rest of these are all Microsoft. Plus there's other Microsoft agents down here. There are some featured agents. And then at the bottom, I've got more agents. And as you can see, there's a lot of third-party agents here. Box, Canva, for instance, Dropbox. More and more being created all the time. So agents that will interact. If you've used ChatGPT and you have created custom GPTs, very similar experience. And also sharing them as well can be very similar. So that is agents. So if I go to the prompt agent, for instance, I can go in here and I can say, what can you do? And this is a reminder, by the way, that if you need to know how to do something, you can ask Copilot how to do it. If you want to know if Copilot can do a particular task, ask it. So do use Copilot to help you to work with Copilot. The more you ask it, the more you ask for help and information, you'll get a kind of back and forth dialogue going. And it's really useful for brainstorming. And also encourage Copilot to use chain of thought processing. So you understand how it came up with the idea. Um, I've just seen a question I'll just very quickly attend to before we move in. How do you see the difference between Copilot, ChatGPT, and Claude? Is Copilot really good at one thing that other AI isn't? It's an interesting one because people use Claude increasingly. ChatGPT was very popular for a while. Copilot was always seen as the limited one. It's only limited in the sense of security. Because obviously, it's not internet based by default, and there are lots of checks and balances around Copilot to make sure it's safer to use. From a research perspective, Claude is seen as being very good. There's lots of others out there. There's one called Manus, which I've used quite a bit. I think Meta bought them recently. So, it really is about doing some research. The fact is that most of the AIs now, unless they are specific LLMs or SLMs, small language models for a very specific task, they will generally have the same capability as each other. It's just then really about the deeper research aspects of it. So the deeper research is really where you look at the same data, but you just look closer at it. So you see more information, more signals. So that can be a challenge. So pre-built agents, like I said, there are a few. We've had a few questions coming through as we've been going along, so that's great. If anybody's got anything they'd like to ask right now, please drop it in the chat. Obviously, Readiness have a lot of other training available. There's lots of courses you can sign up for. We do all the Microsoft training as well as others. So please do sort of have a look at their website and see if there's anything there that would help you. I hope you found today useful. I hope you found it interesting, apart from anything else. There's a whole lot to unravel with Copilot. It's really about being patient, setting yourself expectations, and remember that there's a difference between knowledge and experience. And it's up to us to have the experience so that we can look at the knowledge that's being shared with us. But I hope you found today useful. It's been a full-on session, so thank you very much for your time.